With great power comes great responsibility. Maybe the most well-known quote from comic books. However, the corollary to that is, with great responsibility comes great sacrifice. Peter Parker lost Uncle Ben, but gained Spider-Man. But what if Spider-Man lost Peter Parker, but gained Miles Morales? What would be his sacrifice? And what is the meaning of sacrifice to all Spider-Men? What is the meaning of Spider-Man to you, dear viewer? These questions and others will answer in this, my review of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Please join me after the intro for my review. Hello, I'm Anatole, and welcome to my review of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And before I begin, I want to mention that before doing this review, I read a collection of movie reviews by Roger Ebert, my favorite film reviewer. And something I picked up from him, and to me, Roger Ebert was a master of the film review, was creating context in a review for a film, discussing the history. How did this film get made? What did it mean to the director? And how is it responding to other films of that genre? So to begin with, I want to talk about I want to answer that question. How did this film get made? And a lot of where I'm drawing my information from comes from an article that was published in Variety in December of 2014. The title of the article is Sony Emails by David S. Cohn. So that's primarily where I'm getting my information from. So I hope you're ready for a story. This is going to be just a tad long, but hopefully interesting. It's March 2014, 2 weeks before the premiere of the Andrew Garfield-headed film Amazing Spider-Man. An executive of Sony writes about the movie, quote, "Uneven, everybody too dour. Not a single great set piece because the action is just big and not story, not funny at all." That executive was Amy Pascal, former co-chairperson of Sony Pictures Entertainment. At the time she's writing, she is the co-chairperson of Sony Pictures Entertainment. Today, though, she is former co-chair. That same year, 2014, she was engaged in trying to lure Phil Lord and Chris Miller, the directors of the hits Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and 21 Jump Street, both for Sony Studios, to head their animation division. Amy wrote in confidence to another executive that Sony was falling behind other studios, such as Disney and Warner Brothers, who could rely on the large number of franchises to reliably produce a tentpole film every summer and winter film season. Of course, Disney had Marvel and Lucasfilms, so making Star Wars and Iron Man and all that, and Warner Brothers had the DC films. Sony only had X-Men and Spider-Man. It had James Bond in partnership with Columbia and MGM, and James Bond, the cost of producing those films was becoming so great that the profit from those films was very small. Sony had the air of desperation. Various attempts to make a new franchise failed. After Earth, RoboCop, Ghostbusters, Total Recall. Amy Pascal searched for a way to produce hits each summer and winter like Marvel. She struck on the idea of a Spider-Man film each year. One movie about Venom, which was produced. One movie about the Secret Six, unproduced. One animated Spider-Man film. Before doing that, she needed someone to head their animation division in order to make it work. She tasked Hannah Minghella, former head of Sony Pictures Animation, with assessing the current state of the animation division. Minghella wrote back, quote, "Limited number of active franchises. ImageWorks moving to Vancouver impacts the competitive edge that came from being LA based. And ImageWorks was their in-house special effects studio and animation studio. Sorry, gotta change the page. Continuing the quote from Minghella. Though morale negatively impacts talent retention, studio reputation negatively impacts talent recruitment, end quote. So that was a vicious circle for them. Feeling pressure to turn things around with the animation studio and to produce a franchise for the studio, for Sony, Amy approached Phil Lord and Chris Miller about overseeing the animated Spider-Man movie for the studio. Chris Miller told them they would only do it if it was a film about Miles Morales' Spider-Man. And here I'm going to emphasize this point. Chris Miller told them they would only do it if it was a film about Miles Morales' Spider-Man. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how we get a film about Miles Morales and not Peter Parker. And that's the end of my story. And now the plot summary, courtesy of IMDb and the user Tom Daly. Miles Morales is a New York teen struggling with school, friends, and on top of that, being the new Spider-Man. When he comes across Peter Parker, the erstwhile savior of New York and the multiverse, Miles must train to become the new protector of his city. And that's it for the plot summary. Now to get into my thoughts about the film. Now let's get into the film. First, the introduction. I was really happy with the introduction. It introduces us to Miles' world. We get to see the supporting characters, the parents, the friends he made at his old school, which is good because that also shows us why he's unhappy with the new school. It also subtly tells us a little bit about the things that were happening behind the scenes before the story began. The earthquake is all part of the first try of Kingpin to get into the other dimension, and the music, the opening great song of Sunflower, all that draws us into the world. So it's a great introduction. Then we get Spider-Man brings Miles closer to the other. So Spider-Man is, by this I mean the figure of Spider-Man, the two Peter Parkers, the Peter Parker and Peter B. Parker. So because of Spider-Man, Miles gets closer to Gwen. Because of Spider-Man, he in the end gets closer to his father, because at the start of the film there's the tension about Miles going to Vision Academy, and he just wants to be at his old school with his old friends, but his father wants him to be at the academy. That's right. So in the end, being Spider-Man solves his needs within the story, but it costs him his uncle. That's the sacrifice. So the question becomes, because as I mentioned in the intro, with great power comes great responsibility, but also the corollary argument to that is with great responsibility comes great sacrifice. And Spider-Man, the Spider-Mins, the Spider-Girl, and the Spider-Creature, they all sacrifice someone close to them as part of becoming Spider-Man. So was that worth the cost? We get the death of Peter Parker, I thought struck a real note of pathos. In the commentary for the film, you get the sense that Phil Lord and Chris Miller are uncomfortable with slow scenes that build character. They have them, but their inclination is to punch in with a joke if they can. But the death of Peter, there is no punching in with a joke. They let the scene play for a long time too, which I thought was really good. So it shows us it's not just a comedy. It's a film of many different tones, drama and being one of them. And technically, interesting note, Miles has two tragedies the way the film presents it. One is the death of Peter Parker, and the second is the death of Uncle Aaron. So in some ways, he gives more of a sacrifice, or he has more of a tragedy in his origin than the other Spider-Men do. And by Spider-Man, I'm including Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker. The men here, the plural Spider-Man just means spider people. for me when I say Spider-Man. Not sold on the dynamic of the two uncles, the two brothers, Aaron and Jefferson Davis, because these two people are supposed to be the central figures of Miles Morales. And I should include the mom, but there's the tension between the two uncles. Somehow, we are supposed to believe that Miles is a combination of the two. But we saw that with Peter Parker, in his origin story, Aunt May and Uncle Ben were both good people. And even if Peter Parker had never become Spider-Man, he would have been a good person. So why doesn't Miles Morales have a dark side to him if he's also from the influence of Uncle Aaron? I guess really it's supposed to be the artistic side. That's what he takes up from his Uncle Aaron, and a little bit of the rebellious side. But we see Uncle Aaron is not just a rebel, he is a criminal. And we see the way that Miles expresses himself in rebellion. There is a little bit of the law breaking through the graffiti, but he's not doing crime. He's not doing a hard crime, felonies. So I just don't buy the. We need more exploration, more explanation of this relationship between the two brothers. I don't know if we need to have it solved, if we need to understand why Uncle Aaron became the bad one and Miles's father Jefferson became the good one. But I just need more of a reason why Miles is fundamentally an unselfish person, a generous person. Why his father and his mother had such an influence. If, from what we see, it seems like Uncle Aaron is the greater influence. I just don't buy that. It needs more. I needed more to see more of it. And there was a scene between the two brothers, the two uncles, that was cut, unfortunately. I think would have solved that problem for me. The music. The music reflects Miles' world and his influence and underscores the emotions. It's good to see a superhero film not just have the symphonic score or the rock music. They even point out in the soundtrack on iTunes that the 2002 Spider-Man film, the first one from Sam Raimi, had a collection of rock songs. So that was nice. It reflects the world. It gives us a little something different to hear Notorious B.I.G. That was a shock. Was not expecting that. However, the sum is better than the collection of the parts. If you go through the soundtrack, it doesn't really cohere. It has 3 or 4 hit songs, and those songs really hit the mark. They do what they have to do. But it doesn't provide grand themes like John Barry's Superman score or Howard Shore's Batman scores. It's not as strong a collection of pop songs as Prince's Purple Rain was, and it doesn't have the consistent highs of Purple Rain. And Purple Rain is an amazing soundtrack. However, it hits the signature moments. So the intro song, Sunflower, from Post Malone. The hero's despair, that moment where the hero feels like all the world is against him and he has no recourse to solve the problems of the world or to bring the people he's lost back. That is Scared of the Dark by Lil Wayne and Tentacon. And then we get the hero's emergence, the great hero scene from What's Up Danger, Black Way and Black Caviar. But you go through the soundtrack, all those songs are just good. Like, they're not going to be remembered in 15 years. Those few songs I've mentioned, I think, will be. They're really good. But the rest of the soundtrack is serviceable. So that's my feeling on the soundtrack. And let's stop there for now, so I can collect my thoughts and then finish off giving my comments on the film. Let's talk about the villains. I thought there was a nice remixing and re-imaging of the old bad guys. I particularly liked Doc Ock. I was surprised when she made that turn and revealed herself to be the villain. And as they talked about on the commentary, they try to subtly give hints that this was Doc Ock. So when you go into her office at, oh shoot, hold on. At Alchemex, if you look on the ceiling, the light fixtures are placed within an octagon pattern, hence Doc Ock. Octagon, Doc Ock. I thought that was quite clever. And I like the way they made Scorpion kind of a cyborg creature. That was quite interesting. And I like the way all the villains pair up with the heroes, the alternative universe heroes. So Scorpion matches with the Spider Woman, the anime style Spider Woman from 3099, I think, or 3049, the one from the future, or 2049. And we get Spider Noir matches, oh, I can't remember the name. It's the guy with the gun. But it was nice. They really put thought into how each hero matches the villain. And then I thought the fight scenes, this is kind of the bread and butter of superhero films. Well, the characterization should be the bread and butter, but really, you know that that's what the audience comes to see, the special effects and the fight scenes. What makes them come for the sequel is the character development. That's when they recommend the film to their friends. But what gets them into the seats, what puts the butts in the seats is the action scenes. So let's talk about those fight scenes. I thought the fight in Aunt May's house is great. It reminds me of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1 number, oh shoot, I put 5, but I think it's like 53, 54, somewhere in the 50s. It's where, boy, it's just crazy, crazy story. Doc Ock goes to live in Aunt May's house, not knowing Peter Parker's Spider-Man. It's complete coincidence. And usually that kind of thing drives me crazy, but it's just so far out there. I buy it just because it's deliciously over the top. So Doc Ock is living in Aunt May's house. Oh, Prowler, by the way, is the one who's the... I just saw his name. Prowler's the one who matches up with Spider-Man Noir. But anyway, the Amazing Spider-Man 53, 54, somewhere in there. Spider-Man, of course, gets into his Peter Parker garb, goes into his house with Aunt May and sees Doc Ock there. And there's a whole subplot of Doc Ock and Aunt May having romantic tension that's kind of crazy. And it's a little, I don't know if they're hinting at it in the film, but when Aunt May sees Doc Ock in the movie and Spider-Man says, "What should I call you?" And she says, "My friends call me," oh, I can't remember her name, let's say Lily, "but my enemies call me Doc Ock." When Aunt May sees Doc Ock, she says, "Hey, Lily," or no, she says, "Hey, Lily," kind of a dejected voice, but she calls her by the first name. The kind of thing that implies familiarity. It's very strange, that scene that she calls Doc Ock by the first name. But it does all those things, the fight in the house and the familiarity that Aunt May has with Doc Ock recalls the comic book Volume 1, the John Buscema and drawn and Stan Lee written Spider-Man. A great comic book. Highly recommend those old comic books. If you only know Spider-Man from the modern comic books or cartoons or movies, you should go back and check out the Stan Lee and Steve Ditko issues, especially the one in the 40s, like 44, 45, when Spider-Man's trapped under falling, oh God, I think it is Doc Ock actually, Doc Ock's secret hideout underneath the water, and he's trapped beneath, and he wants to give up, and he doesn't, because he has to go. He realizes he's got other people who are depending upon him, so he draws all his strength to lift up like this. He's under the water's rising up, and he's got all this concrete, and he draws all his strength to lift it up and get out. It's a mastery of panel use. Anyone who's interested in the art of sequential storytelling, as Will Eisner referred to it, should go back and read that. I mean, it doesn't need my praise. it's already regarded as a masterpiece. But if you are not familiar with it, definitely go back and check out. I can't remember the issue, but just Google Steve Ditko Spider-Man trapped. That's probably all you need. But Spider-Man trapped underwater, and you'll find the reference to that issue. But in any event, Prowler is very menacing. Oh no, Prowler, boy, I'm still not on it. Prowler matches up with Miles Morales' Spider-Man. I don't remember who matches up with Spider-Man Noir. You know what? I'll just go look it up right now. So, cut. And the villain is Tombstone. Probably should have done that earlier. So, yeah, I liked the fight in Aunt May's house. I really like the Kirby crackle when they get into the collider scenes, but I'm not so fond of the collider scenes. It's just a little too broad, just a little too, oh, here's the extra dimensional threat place that we're going to have the big boss fight in. It was imaginative, but it didn't wow me like some of the other fights. And then I liked how there were different tones between the fights. So you had the brawls, which was the fight in Aunt May. You had the caper scene, which was breaking into Alchemax. Then you had also caper scene breaking into the Kingpin's house. Sorry, Kingpin's skyrise, where the collider is located. So yeah, for the most part, I thought all the fight scenes were really well done and unique. Oh yeah, and you also had the suspense scenes, the predator-prey scenes when the Prowler is chasing Miles Morales, those couple scenes. So there are all these different tones between the fight scenes, which is better than many action films. So kudos to that. All right, give me 1 second. I'm going to change the battery on my preamp, and then I'll be right back. Now let's talk about the acting. I'm going to discuss the 4 major characters of the film. Get this shirt straight. Oh, there we go. So this began with Shamik Moore as Miles Morales. First off, I love his voice. So very important in an animated film where it's a voice actor. You don't see their movements if they put them into a suit, green screen suit, motion capture suit. Then they can express themselves through their body, and I imagine they do. I think for most of these major films, they do put them into motion capture suits for at least some of the scenes. Like for instance, I think the death scene may have been a motion capture. But the voice is very important. He has such a unique voice. And then he had a really hard part because he had to be both funny and play off the dramatic scenes too, because the film had many tones, and I thought he did them well. I thought he did the drama better than the humor, but he was good at both. And I also thought that, yeah, it's easy to gloss over a role like this because it's a quote-unquote animated superhero film. So both of those, we're not trained to expect serious acting in an animated film. Like, can you name the last time someone who is a voice actor in an animated film was nominated for Best Actor, Actress Award in the Academy Motion Picture? Redundant. Can you name someone who was a voice actor? Oh my God, you can tell. It's the end of a long shooting day. The last time someone who was a voice actor in an animated film was nominated for the Oscar or won for their work in an animated film. You cannot, because it's never happened. So yeah, and I think the reason for that was we gloss over their performances. We don't get to see their physical performance. It's all hinging on the voice. And a lot of these animated films also, they're not written as Oscar bait. They do give out an award now for Best Animated Film, but since Beauty and the Beast was the last film to be nominated for Best Motion Picture, they're not seen as Oscar bait. They're not written specifically for the award season. So we don't usually get the complicated characters you get in feature film, in a live action feature film, unfortunately. But we shouldn't gloss over all the performances, and I think Shamik Moore did a fine performance in a more difficult role than at first seems. Jake Johnson as Peter B. Parker. He had some serious moments. He hit the tones really well, but he is known to me as a comedic actor from New Girl. I think for a majority of people who saw this film, if they know him, it's from that film, from that TV show. And so I associate him with comedy, and he's really good at it. Like the part where there's the broad humor when they're in Alchem X and he's overhearing Kingpin and Doc Ock discussing the experiments with the collider. And Doc Ock says, we can't do this, we have to stop because we could open up a black hole underneath Brooklyn. And Peter B. Parker tells Miles, yeah, this is the part where he says, you got to do it in 24 hours or else I'll have your head. And then we hear Kingpin say, you got to do it in 24 hours or else I'll have your head. And then she says, but it'll open up a black hole. He says, oh yeah, that is really bad. So you get two different tones. You get the comedic and the serious. And Jake Johnson does that scene really well. Haley Steinfeld, I bought it. I bought her performance. It's neither comedy nor drama. It's a little of both. It's maybe just a touch underwritten. They give her character the one real need, and that's that she lost a friend. That's part of her origin story. So her need is to know that she can have a friend and that friend won't get killed because she is Spider-Woman, Spider-Gwen. So they give her a serious need, and I think she plays those off well. And yeah, so I bought it. She does the comedy and the drama. The character is not as developed, not as complicated as Miles Morales, and it's not as one-sided as Peter B. Parker, who's mainly there for humor. And Haley Steinfeld did both tones. She did the drama and the comedy. And then Mahershala Ali as Aaron Davis, as the Prowler. That's my guy. He is one actor. He's amazing in True Detective Season 3. And I think that his death scene, just like True Detective Season 3, shows how good of an actor he is, because a really good actor raises the performance of the actors they're with. And just like in True Detective, in episode 5, where him and Steven Dorff are like doing jazz with each other, you can see the way that they deliver their lines, and then you see the other actor responding to those lines, and in the way they look and their body language, and then in the tone of their voice, and it's just like volley back and forth. We get a tennis match where neither player is going to give up. Well, you get that with jazz, the call and response. It's just like that. Also, that death scene between Shameik Moore and Mahershala Ali, and every note, every syllable from Mahershala is genuine and real, and draws you into this character who went down the wrong path, but at the very last moment, with their very last breath, they want to leave something good in the world, and he does that. So that's just amazing. Now let's discuss the animation, and then we'll almost be done. The animation, I thought, well, this is the film I wanted as a child, but not quite, because when I was a child, I wanted the well-funded animated feature film where you see the money and the backgrounds. They don't just recycle the same background again and again. And that's when you know it's a low-budget feature, when they're driving down or in a car down the street, and you can see the same buildings appearing again and again. I wanted the fully funded animated feature, and we saw adaptations of comic books or adaptations of superheroes that got really close, like Batman Mask of the Phantasm, but the budget wasn't quite there to execute it with the polish it deserved. Or we saw in films like Akira that you could adapt comic book into a feature film and make it look like an A feature and have it be a work of art, but it wasn't superheroes. It wasn't the thing I was holding out for. And then we get it. This film is it. But unfortunately, it's not all hand drawn. So what I really give credit to the animators was they used the computer scenes effectively, efficiently, intelligently, and then they still introduced the hand-drawn. A lot of the most important character scenes were hand-drawn. So how did they manage to mix the style of computer and hand-drawn? And they did that by using animation on the twos, because they wanted to still give you the feeling of those panels, the way that you have to use your imagination to connect two different panels, because you see an action in panel 1, and then you see the continuation of that action in panel 2, and between those two panels is the passage of time. Maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, maybe 1 second, but there is some passage of time. So by drawing on the twos, which meant that every second frame was animated, gave it kind of a jerky feeling like you would get with anime. So we had to use our imagination to fill in the completion of that action. That brought us closer to comic book style. And then they used onomatopoeia, thought speech, text squares. God bless it. What's the name of that called? They're not thought bubbles, text speech. But among those elements from comic book are pausing the action for just a moment to frame it. All that was a way that they were able to draw comic books into animated film. Now, whether any of that will ever stick in future animated films, even superhero films, I don't know. Maybe this will be the only film to draw upon comic books that heavily in the style of the film. I think maybe animating on the twos will stay because it's cost effective, and they're always looking for ways to kind of cut corners, and that's a style we know from anime. We're used to that. So even if it's done in the past, maybe not in this film, but in other films, as a way of being more efficient with the pencil power, the pencil that Matt Groening referred to it as pencil miles. Yeah, so you could animate anything, but it's just a matter of how long it's going to take. So Matt Groening and his was it Al Joffrey? Matt Jean, I think, was the executive producer of Simpsons. I know from their commentary on the Simpsons track, they called it pencil miles. That you could animate anything, it's just a matter of how long and how many people it's going to take to animate. So animating on the twos is a way of reducing the workload by half. So I think that'll stay. And like I said, it's a style. We've seen it in the past in anime. We're used to that. Even if we don't associate that as being cheap or cutting corners, they may keep that in the future because it is a way of kind of cutting corners. And as long as it retains hand-drawn animation, I'm for it, because I love the style of hand-drawn animation. There are some things computers do better, mainly backgrounds, but I just hate losing hand-drawn because they do corners, they do, there's a feeling and a texture to hand-drawn you can't get with computers. You can get close, but you can't get it. So, oh yeah, so different spider heroes each had their own style, the villains had their own style. That was another way of aping the charm of the comic books, and I really liked it. And that pretty much rounds out what I thought about the animation. So my final thoughts on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Like I said, it was the film that I've been waiting for all my life. The animated superhero film that brings us the feeling of comic books, but is still an animated film, has the strengths of the animated film without sacrificing what we love about comic books. And I do hope that there is a sequel, because Hollywood has shown they can do superhero sequels at the same level as the original, if not better. Just look at the Batman films. That second film was better than the first. And if they do a sequel, I hope that it keeps the same creatives who did this first one, because they had a feeling for the comic book. They were bold in deciding to do Miles and not Peter, and they saw a way of doing it that would marry the strengths of animation and the strengths of comic books, and it was well executed. Great acting, great score. Even if it was not consistent, it was still a really good score. And in the end, I'm very happy with this film, and I hope you were too. So please leave your comments about what you thought about the film. If you agree with me, how do you agree? And if there are some things you disagree, how and why do you disagree? That's it. So I hope you're doing well. That's all for now. Take care, and see you again in my next review. Goodbye. Hey, hey, hey. Woo! Oh. Woo! Woo! In the dust, sunflower, sunflower, you're leaning too much. Up in the dust, sunflower, you're the sunflower, you're a sunflower.